Okay, welcome to the Backyard Professor Live Sunday night show. Many of you are returning from Radio Free Mormons podcast, which was very disturbing. The topic is not a fun topic, but Radio Free Mormon did an outstanding job. Oh, hey, Radio Free Mormon, you're here. Welcome, man. Nice job on your premiere. That was, I'm going to stay in a good mood. We get it. The church is just making all kinds of wrong points of view. But tonight we're going to go to the more scholarly end of things with my guest tonight, who is a doctorate with Roman, I'll put it that way. He works at Florida State, and you all know who he is. Many of you do, I should say. If you don't know him, it's your loss. So tonight I give you the win by bringing on one of the great scholars of the Greco-Roman era, which is really cool because this ties directly in to the whole theme of Jesus. And of course, the historical Jesus is a big deal. So without any further ado, let me bring on the man of the hour, Dr. Trevor Luke. Drum roll. A lousy sounding drum, isn't it? Hi, Trevor. How you doing?
All that false advertising. I don't know, man.
I didn't really do you very much good, did I? I apologize.
No, you blew it up. I mean, where can I go from here, man? We were supposed to ramp it up slowly.
You're supposed to go and collect 200.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
How you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. You're right. Radio Free Mormon, with his usual eloquence, compassion, intelligence, did a fantastic job in a disturbing topic, one of the most outrageous cases that I've ever encountered, and absolutely unconscionable. And I mean, what more can we say? But thanks to him for educating all of us.
Yes, thank goodness we have so many good podcasters who are so sharp and on the ball that we can keep up with not only the social consequences, etc., but to help those of us who really just can't do the Mormon thing anymore feel happier and free that we've been blessed with the option of opting out and continuing on with our lives as useful people, as happy. The church loves to intimidate us. Where will you go? Well, I'm going to go anywhere else except your stupid chapels and temples. So that's not.
Well, so, for me, the safety of kids, if you can't protect the safety of children, it's a deal breaker.
Yeah.
And I don't see a good faith effort. I'm sorry to say. I don't see, when I hear stories like that, I'd love to see it. Maybe I'm wrong. But I need more evidence that the right policies are there to protect kids. And I'm not seeing it. Instead, I'm seeing people calling attention to the problem punished. And
they're shooting the messenger.
It's
a good thing today's church leaders weren't in Joseph Smith's day. They would have probably shot Moroni.
Oh, gosh.
The messenger.
Yeah.
So tonight, now about, 2-3 weeks ago, I don't even know if it's been that long, has it? You began posting on a really intriguing subject that I immediately saw on the MormonDiscussion.com message board. And I read through that. I read through it, and no kidding, I printed out the whole thing. I have page after page after page after page after page, man.
Wow. Okay.
And I've been reading this, and what an intriguing subject. Jesus as a Roman god.
Yeah.
And as you began to explain what you were meaning, it dawned on me Okay. That actually may now through the years, you and I have been talking back and forth, and your expertise is in the Greco-Roman culture with the
That's
Roman,
right.
and
Yeah.
it's because of you, my dear friend, that I have bothered to purchase such books. Oh, I don't know if I'm grabbing any of the Roman ones or not, but anyway, I've been trying to get the classics.
Oh, okay. Well, that's Charlemagne, but he's close.
And there's the letters of Pliny.
Oh, well, there's my man. I'm teaching Pliny next semester in the spring.
Nice. And there's Tacitus.
Oh, another one of the greats. Another person I
Petronius
study a lot.
Satirica. Now, I admit, Hugh Nibley's the one that caused me to buy this one.
Well, Petronius is wild stuff. I mean, if you want
he is
crazy,
something else.
wild, and disturbing.
And then there's Livy, the early history of Rome. So anyway, the reason I'm saying this is because through our conversations and friendship through the years, I've realized I lack in an understanding of the Romans, and that really shouldn't be. So, I mean, I will never get adept at it, but I knew just enough that when I read your approach to Jesus as a Roman God, I realized, wow, there's something really intriguing here. So they didn't come to hear me, they came to hear you. So let's make the case for the Roman God called Jesus Christ. And then here in about an hour or so, if things work out, we both have a mutual friend and a dearly beloved LDS historian, Don Bradley, who's going to come on the show and share some of his views with us. And so I'm very, very excited for tonight's show. So you just let me know when to you do your spiel. I'll ask a question or two every now and then. And when you need me to switch these slides, just tell me to go to the next one. So
okay. All right. Well, first of all, yeah, I'm Dr. Trevor Luke, teach at Florida State University, PhD in ancient history, born under the covenant or born in the covenant, pioneer ancestry, stopped attending church right after Prop 8, I think.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, right after Prop 8, and took up part-time residence at Mormon Discussions Board under a pseudonym, but gone through my career and have never really given up an interest in early Christianity, even though it's not my primary area. Also, Mormonism and Mormonism's perception of its ancient roots. So what does that mean? What's the significance of Mormons believing that they're a restoration of, early Christianity? Now the story of how I got onto this, and I say Jesus is a Roman God. It's a deliberately provocative thing to say.
It sure is. How could you?
Well, it's to get people thinking and to make them say you're wrong and to get into a discussion. It's really not, though, and this, I want to be very clear about this. This is not my attack on Christianity. Rather, it's a challenge to people to think about how Christianity and the Roman world relate to each other in a new way. Because Christianity over time developed a narrative that Romanness and Christianity are on completely different pages, and that Christianity won, the Romans lost, and it's a story of Christian triumph. Now, Christianity, in a sense, did win, and Christianity, is in many ways at the foundation of what today people call Western civilization. But I would say that Roman civilization carried on, and that it carried on in Christianity. Okay. So, from that point of view, which is my point of view, and I hope to, help persuade you a little bit about why that might have some validity. I was on Facebook wasting time. I should have been doing other much more productive things. Reading a dissertation that I'm supposed to be examining and so forth.
Ooh.
And I saw our friend, Dr. Trevin Hatch.
Oh, hey,
Yeah.
that's how it started. I've had him
Yeah.
on my show a few times.
Yeah.
Good
Well,
guy.
he's a smart
Ooh,
guy. He's
hey,
a smart
maybe
guy.
I'll have to have him on this show again to refute you.
I think so. Yeah. No, that would be great. No, I'd love to hear what he would respond, how he would respond to my position.
I should have said respond to you, not refute you.
Oh, well, hey.
See, I'm still
up for
arguing.
that. I'm up for refutation, sure.
All right.
But
I've rarely seen you refuted, so.
well, I'm infamous for being a little bit stubborn, especially on discussmormonism.com.
No.
Sometimes I make people a little upset by being stubborn.
That's because the apologists can't handle you.
Well, it's more than the apologists.
Oh.
And I don't think it's proper to say that they can't handle me. I think it's maybe I can be a little bit irksome in my stubbornness. So I forgive people for getting angry with me, because if I were on the other end, I'd probably be angry with me too. Anyway, Trevin, smart guy. I really like his approach to things, his interest in, really understanding the history of early Christianities. And, that's a tough thing to do in his position. And we should really respect that, because, BYU can be an unforgiving environment in some ways. And yet he, I think, represents his religion well, while also being a credible and responsible scholar doing his job right. But something he did, he posted this picture of the Christus statue, and he said, why does Jesus, and he was thinking about, the iconic image of Jesus now in the LDS church is the Christus statue. Why does Jesus look like a Mediterranean god? Why does he look like Zeus? Now, that's a great question for a historian to ask. So he's doing his job. That's the right question. Why is that? And we want to know. And there's a lot of research that could be done on that very topic. And, some of the common answers were raised in that thread. But here's another thing. Then he posted a kind of reproduction of, or sort of a hypothetical mock-up of what a first century Jew living in Palestine might have looked like. And he said, why don't we have this image? And then I get this little imp in my brain, like that little devil that sits on your shoulder. And it just came to me. Unfortunately, I tend to feed him instead of flicking him off. It's like, yeah, let's work together.
I think buddy. I accidentally just flicked the angel off because I hear this guy laughing.
So that imp was saying to me, because he's a Roman god, damn it. That's why he looks like that, because he is a Roman god. And that's what I said in the thread. And I got a couple of likes.
You've done better than I would.
But but it was clear to me that I wasn't going to get a lot of traction with it, and that, Trevin wasn't really eager to follow up on that point. So I went over to DM, where I will unload if my mind is firing on a topic like this. Yeah.
Thank goodness. Great discussion. Everybody ought to go there and read this after this program. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There are different influences. And here we see an image of Jesus that looks something like a medieval king or a knight. And, people take exception to images like this for political reasons. And, I get it. And I think that if you think about it carefully, that what Trevin is asking is also somewhat political, in that he's saying, let's get away from the sort of phony baloney, triumphal medieval, and we can add to the end of that white supremacist view of Jesus and Christianity, and let's really talk about that Mediterranean Jew. And I respect that. I think it's absolutely important for all of us to deal with the historical Jesus, or the question of the historical Jesus, and to think about, okay, if there is a historical Jesus, what is that person actually like?
Yeah, that's fun. You are actually one of those scholars who have influenced me. Now, when I lost my faith and all that jazz, I went on the deep end, and I actually went against actually believing the historical Jesus's existence. I read the Richard Carriers and what's his nose? I've got his book right here. I can't remember his name. This is horrible. Oh yeah, Earl Doherty and all those
Earl
guys.
Doherty. I never read Earl Doherty. Robert Price. Robert Price is one.
Oh, he's the other one. Yeah,
Robert Price. I love Robert Price's work. I've read several of his books.
His best book is this one, though.
Well, yeah, that I picked up that one too. I got that at an SBL meeting.
Oh, that's a fantastic book for background. Wow.
Yeah, I hung out with him once at a meeting.
Did you?
Yeah. Oh, he was a really nice guy, and I loved his Cthulhu rings. He was wearing all of these Cthulhu rings.
Oh, how cool.
Oh, yeah. No, because one of his other things that he loves to do is write for Lovecraft fanzines and things like that. He writes articles about Lovecraft.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah.
Well, you're one of the scholars who kind of helped me pull back and re-examine, all of it. I mean, I started buying historical Jesus. I bought all the atheist books, and then I turned around and I bought all the historical Jesus books through the various different phases. We had the first phase, then the second one, then we're just done with the third one. There might be a fourth one. So I went and blew all my hard-earned money on that and began reading all that. It's some of your materials on the message board that helped me recognize I might have jumped the gun here just a little bit, because hey, look, it's emotional. It's an emotional
situation. No, it is. I agree.
You kind of zippity doodah without thinking. And so I've been very appreciative through the years of our friendship, because you kind of reel me in and say, okay, I get it, but look at it from this point of view. And look, you got me to look at him more as the tecton. You remember that?
Yeah.
A couple years ago, and I actually wrote a paper on it just for kicks and giggles to show you.
Oh my gosh.
So this is quite a subject. This is very interesting subject on the historical Jesus. So this is why this intrigues me, is because this is not the historical Jesus we've been looking for. And
sure.
There he is.
Yeah.
And this is one of the interesting quotes.
This is my quote on my signature on DM. And it sounds kind of conspiratorial, I think, if they get you asking around, like, who's they? But I don't think it is. I think we can take it as, if we're asking the wrong questions, then our answers are really meaningless. We have to really do an archaeology of what informs our mindset. We have to dig through the layers of opinions, ideas, civilizational themes, to get back to what the world was like when Jesus was alive and after he died. And that world was a fundamentally Roman world. The Romans were ruling the Mediterranean. The Romans were ruling either through satellite rulers like the Herodian dynasty, or through their own governors. They were ruling Palestine, and that's very clear in the Gospels. But when you understand that, when you really let that seep in, you realize, well, what would this be like? What would our idea of Jesus be like? What would Christianity be like without Jesus or without the Romans? So,
Sorry, I'm a slide behind.
oh no, you're fine.
What does this mean? There we go. Here we go.
So what I want to talk about with you, Carrie, is like what do I mean by Jesus as a Roman God?
Yeah,
I'm not saying
you
that.
mean that almost sounds subversive.
Yeah,
after all, one of the big historical discussions and fights in the historical Jesus subject has been the return to actually grasping the Jewishness of Jesus. And James H. Charlesworth spearheaded that. And then you have Lawrence Schiffman, the great Dead Sea Scroll scholar, who also said, yeah, this Christian Jesus doesn't cut the mustard because he never was Christian. He's always been Jewish. And so let's look at that. And so you bringing in the Roman God adds an incredibly interesting, in-depth layer. And that's why I love this.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So what's the first question that comes to your mind when you hear me claiming that Jesus is a Roman God? Maybe what Physics Guy asked on the thread, which is, essentially, what do you mean by that? Because he's not like Jupiter, he's not like Mercury, he's not like Juno or Minerva. I mean, when we think of Roman gods, that's what we're thinking about. So what's behind this question? And so I'm looking at the issue from 3 different vantage points. One of them is that Christianity could have only emerged in this particular historical context with these cultures, with the interaction between Judaism, Hellenism, the Greeks, and the Romans. Right? So that's one pillar. It's the cultural context. What is it? What is interacting here in this world that brings about this Christianity and the figure of Jesus as a deity? So the second pillar is, and this is where we can specifically refer to a fabulous book that everybody should read. Let me see if I get this. I'm terrible at David Litw's Jesus Deus, the early Christian depiction of Jesus as a Mediterranean God. So
I have mine somewhere.
That it's a fantastic book. And by the way, Carrie recommended it to me because
just this week, and you read it this week, didn't you?
I read it this week. I knew David was a great scholar. Works at the University of Virginia. I've seen him on other podcasts. He's a great podcast guest, but I had not read this particular book.
He's big with Derek Lambert on Myth Vision. Yeah. He actually has a gospel. No, I say gospel. He has a scholar's course, and I need to join up with that because then I can sell the course through my website here through my live. But he's doing a college course on the Mediterranean deities. That looks really promising.
Well, we all need to sign up. That's my attitude because I still have a lot to learn from David Litwa. Now, we can't cover everything David covers in that book here tonight. For the in-depth and very, intricate, nuanced, and convincing arguments, this guy has shown me things that I was completely unaware of. I would say for the second part of this discussion, do yourself a favor. It's like $30 new, but you can also get it Kindle or used, I imagine. But read that book. It's amazing because he makes the argument so eloquently. He shows how Jesus's depiction as a divinity before the Gospels are even written starts to take a very sort of Hellenistic turn. He's already beginning to look more like a Greco-Roman god before the Gospels are written. So Paul is quoting material that wouldn't exist. And frankly, I would add that Paul wouldn't exist as a figure without Greek influence. And that's how intense this whole thing is. And, you know, we start off with this assumption that these are all different cultures, that they almost exist in different boxes, but they're mixing with each other all the time. It's like the discussion of, you know, where did the Book of Mormon come from? And that idea of the great, you know, sort of mix or blender that brings the Book of Mormon together from its context, you know? Same thing with Christianity, guys. Really, it's a mix of Judaism, it's a mix of Hellenism, or the Greeks, their philosophy and literature and religious ideas, and it's the Romans all together. And we can even bring in other influences too. But when Christianity comes to be, those are the big ones there, those three cultures. So, but that's the second part. And if we could go back to that list, from one option among many Hellenistic religions, Christianity emerges as the empire state religion in the late 4th century AD. Okay. So some of you might say, well, I've always heard that the Romans persecuted the Christians. So what are you talking about? Why, if Jesus is a Roman God, would Romans persecute Christians? They should all be getting along and be happy together. But what I'm talking about here is a long process, and there were specific reasons why the Romans didn't accept Christianity, and at times you could say persecuted Christians. But by the 4th century, with the conversion of Constantine in particular, things turn a corner, and increasingly, it's not just the regular people of the empire, the common people, the soldiers who are joining this Christian movement, but you know, it's senators of Rome who are joining the Christian movement. And all along, Christianity starts to look more and more classical, more and more like a reflection of high-level discourse in Greek philosophy. And so I would say that he was a god of the Roman Empire in the time leading up to that, one of many options, and in some ways an option that was persecuted by, you know, authorities on occasion. But by the end, he is a full-blown Roman god. But he differs from the other Roman gods in that he doesn't work and play well with others.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, well, I take that from a knock on my performance as an elementary school student in 1st grade. I looked at my report card and there was a little check next to does not work and play well with others. I was devastated, Carrie. I'm scarred.
And it started in 1st grade.
It did. He was too stubborn.
Boy.
But you know, that's how it happens. That's how Jesus goes from being one of the gods that people in the empire worship to being the God who is at the head of an absolutist monarchy and its state religion, which is really what happens to the Roman Empire. That sets up the medieval period.
Yeah. So would I be off base in asking, perhaps with the northern conquest of the barbarians against the Romans, that would have been their political downfall, but by then Jesus had become established, and so Rome religiously, I mean, obviously the capital was Rome, Italy of Christianity. It still is. And we're talking, you know, 1700 years later. So part of Rome disappeared and fell away. But the most important part, if you count religion as the most important part, never really got destroyed at all. It continued to spread. Then you get Byzantium and all of that, the great split east and west with Greek and all that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
So Rome did survive, just in a different form than in Jesus's day politically.
Right. Well, I would say that the Eastern Empire was Rome,
Right.
and they
There you
called
go.
themselves the Romans. We call them the Byzantine Empire, but that's for our own. That's a reflection of our own Western biases to not
Oh, that's
recognize that the Eastern Roman Empire was the Roman
Right.
Empire. So the Roman Empire survived, and Romanism or Roman culture survived in the West in different forms. I would say up to the present. I don't think that Rome has ever completely left us. You can say that, Roman control of the Western Empire and, direct political control ended, but Roman culture continued on and was reborn and recycled and renewed and revisited many times over the centuries, like in the Renaissance and, you know,
Interesting. Yeah.
even our classics departments today, and I work in one, or I would say part of our heritage, our heritage of the Roman Empire, but also our Constitution, the Federalist Papers. If you read the Federalist Papers, what are the founding fathers of this country doing? They're looking, you know, back to the Romans and the Greeks to try to figure out what they should do to form a new nation and give it a constitution. So I don't think Rome has ever left us. And I think Christianity is one of those places where that's especially true because of the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Where Latin is, still kind of a growing living language in some senses in Vatican City.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, but what is this, what is this point of view that I'm trying to get across overturning? And that's like the traditional historical narrative. And I'm not the only person doing this. This is being done by many scholars. I'm sort of packaging it together for you guys this evening as a result of this thread. But there's a definite narrative, and it's a narrative of the triumph of Christianity over paganism. And it's also as part of that triumph, a narrative of the rejection of classical culture. And that's something that really gets rolling with the rise of Protestantism, I would say. And this isn't to knock Protestantism, but it's with the advent of Protestantism, you see more of a concerted effort to suppress the Hellenic or pagan aspects of the Christian tradition, or what are seen as such, in order to kind of purify Christianity and get back to its Hebraic roots. And the idea here is that, there was a time when Jesus was a Jew and he was fulfilling Jewish prophecy to become the Messiah. And it was later than that all of these Greeks kind of messed it up. And then we ended up eventually with this horrible Catholic Church that we broke away from to become Protestants. And it's kind of how the narrative goes. But it's really far from the truth.
Oh, so this traditional history here, we got to revamp this thing, eh?
Yeah.
Well, all right then, Mr. Professor. What is the truth? The truth is out there.
You got to slow me down, Carrie, because I get rolling here, man.
Oh no, I don't want to slow you down. I love this. This is fantastic.
So, but I refer to it as anti-Hellenism. And for those of you who are raised LDS, you're probably kind of familiar with it. Philosophies of men mingling with scripture. That's a familiar line. Or reading Bruce R. McConkie's little Mormon Doctrine Encyclopedia and seeing all of those entries on the Catholic Church being awful, and all of that comes with this narrative that seeks to divorce the true Christianity from this Hellenic past. But it's really impossible. And to go back to that slide, the reason why it's impossible is because before Christianity ever happened, Judaism was heavily influenced by the Greeks.
Now, that's an important point, that we weren't taught in church as such from a cultural perspective. This is really interesting, the effect of this.
Yeah.
There is no single Judaism.
No. I mean, and that's clear, of course, from the New Testament, but
It's true.
the narrative that we're given, we talk about Judaism, right? We don't spend a lot of time talking about when I think most of us are aware of it. Your audience is well read, they're familiar with it. But what I'm talking about are the historical assumptions that tend to inform our master narrative of history. And that is, there's Judaism, then there are Greeks, Hellenes, and there are Romans. And they disagree, they fight, they clash with each other, they hold each other at arm's length. And that's really not how culture works. They're always engaging with each other, always influenced by each other.
They're still buying products from each other. They're still communicating with each other. They're still learning all of their languages together. They travel on the ocean and seas together. They fight together. Yeah.
I mean, there's a Jewish diaspora that carries Jews all over the Mediterranean. And, this is part of what helps Christianity spread, is that all of these guys are mixing together. But, Carrie, I know you know very well that the Hebrew scriptures were translated into Greek in Egypt to become the Septuagint.
Yeah, the Septuagint.
But
this guy, Martin Hengel, I know this is somewhat dated.
Yeah.
Judaism and Hellenism, but he did note one of the important things it's a behemoth of a book, because he's like Hugh Nibley. 99% of his book is footnotes. It's incredible. But his is a biographical footnote text. But the thing that impressed me the most, and it's pathetic, this will show you how small-minded I am. The Jews actually got to the point within the Hellenistic cultural environment that they adapted to the Greek gymnasium in their towns, and they exercised nude with the Greeks.
Yeah.
Now that was a shocker for me, because we always have this image of the Jews being prudes. And I don't mean that in a negative way. Very modest. I should say very modest.
I'm modest. I'm modest.
That's what I meant.
Yeah, I don't have porn shoulders here, Carrie. Hey now.
But and then there are several texts. This is what's his nose?
Oh, okay.
On this subject, The Jews in the Roman World by Michael Grant.
Yeah.
And what they're all showing, the rise and fall of Jewish nationalism. This is Mendel. He's quite a guy. And then the heritage and Hellenism, the reinvention of Jewish tradition by Gruen.
Gruen, he's great.
Yeah, so they're describing what you're saying, that this is because we like to say, well, there's been a restoration of Christianity,
right?
But you back then, for 400 years, you don't have a department of Christianity, a department of Jews, a department of Greeks, a department of Romans. They're all Greco-Roman, and all of them are philosophizing. See, this theme of the anti-intellectualism, because Jesus spoke in simple parables and aphorisms and whatnot. Paul was the most educated, is how we were raised to think of Paul. And of course, he was a strict Jew, but yet he was a Roman, and his philosophy in the book Romans is pretty stellar stuff.
Yeah, no, he knows the stuff. He's very well educated in Hellenic learning, you know. He can speak the language. I mean, he's there in Athens, you know,
Yeah,
in
there
the
you go.
Agora, you know. He's
Mhm.
talking to the Greeks. He's able to preach to them fluently, and he understands. He can be a Greek to Greeks because he has that education.
And a Roman to Romans and a Jew to the Jews. He even says so.
Exactly.
That's
And
interesting.
that's
He's
only because
multicultural.
he's multicultural. He brings those cultures together in himself. He's conversant in them. And I think he's also partly able to do this because they're all Mediterranean. These are cultures that have been in contact with each other for centuries. You know, the Romans didn't encounter the Jews in the time of Jesus. They were familiar with the Jews in the early 2nd century BC.
BC, yes, sir. They
So
sure
by the time that Jesus comes along, you know, Romans and Jews have been in contact with each other for, you know, over 200 years. And there's a Jewish population, a sizable one, thousands of Jews who live in the city of Rome itself. And they would have seen members of the Herodian dynasty visiting Rome, visiting the emperor, living in the emperor's palace on the Palatine Hill, a regular fixture. So it's not like these cultures exist in their own little, you know, secluded and sequestered hidey holes. They know each other.
So
All right, so there's no single Judaism. Judaism is influenced by lots of different cultures: Persian, Egyptian, Greek, Roman. But a big thing happens when Alexander conquers much of the Eastern world. He spreads Greek civilization around, and his friends and hangers-on become the rulers of that East for the next several hundred years, and that's called the Hellenistic era. And one of the really important things that I think is key to talk about, and I'm pretty sure you're already familiar with this, Carrie, but Hellenistic kings had certain promises or slogans that they made when they defeated their enemies, when they sought to fight other kings. They presented themselves as liberators. They presented themselves as conquerors. They also presented themselves as saviors. And this becomes a huge slogan for centuries in, you know, the eastern part of the Mediterranean especially, but really throughout the entire Mediterranean. The Greek word is soter. And
soteriology, salvation,
soteriology,
Savior. Yeah.
So thinking about Jesus as the Savior, this isn't occurring in a vacuum. This is occurring in a cultural environment in which people expect for kings to come and liberate and save them from their oppressors.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a regular rhetorical pattern that we see operating in the Hellenistic kingdoms of the East, the successors of Alexander the Great.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think you get a New Testament in Greek. I don't think you get necessarily a Jesus the Savior in quite the same way, unless you had a world that had been first conquered by Alexander the Great, where you have this very specific royal ideology of, you know, saviorhood. I'm going to rescue you from your oppressors.
Yeah. Very interesting.
It's not incompatible with Judaism. This isn't to say that Jews didn't have any idea about, you know, a king rescuing them from their oppressors, but they would reinforce each other. Those ideas would reinforce each other, work together. And I'm partly interested here in how Christianity moves beyond just Jews and becomes attractive to Gentiles, non-Jews.
Yeah.
And I think it's partly because, you know, those ideas, those Jewish and Greek ideas, were already so compatible that the Greeks could respond to them. They'd be like, oh yeah, I know what a savior is like. I know what a savior king is like.
Yeah.
This has been part of our culture for a long time. They can understand Jesus as Christians or Jews present them to, Jews in the Jesus movement present him to them, because they're familiar with these concepts.
Interesting. Yeah. It didn't happen in a vacuum.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Now this is another big deal. And it's really kind of hard to wrap your mind around at first, because we're so big on issues of identity these days, and we want to very carefully identify ourselves as being one thing or another. Am I a liberal or am I a conservative? What's my particular gender identity? And this is not at all a criticism of our interest in identity. It's really all I'm talking about here is the fact that we can't really assume that in antiquity people approached their identity in the same way. And I would say that was especially true in the area of religion. That most people didn't exclusively identify themselves as belonging to a religion. Rather, the ancient Mediterranean world was filled with all kinds of different deities.
Mm-hmm.
It was very cosmopolitan, and you would find, all kinds of so-called foreign gods all in the city of Rome itself.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't just true of Rome, it was really true of the entire Mediterranean world. People were traveling around. There were communities of different ethnicities in all of these different cities, and they brought their gods with them.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's like you're saying here. There's a on that third or fourth bullet point down. They are the cult of Bacchus, Judaism, Christianity. Another thing that came into my mind was the Egyptian cult of Isis.
Oh yeah,
and then you have the big mother goddess of Rhea.
Yeah,
Cybele. Is it Cybele or Cybele? Cybele.
I've heard pros use both.
Yeah, I have too. Every time I go to pronounce an ancient name, somebody reminds me what a moron I am because I pronounce it
Well,
wrong.
they shouldn't really.
Well, I am.
I just consider that rude, and you're not a moron. You're very, very well educated.
Whatever.
But
so that's interesting that all of the different cults are involved, and we really don't read a lot about the persecutions. Where Rome went to war was when you quit paying your taxes, not when you quit worshiping their gods. They didn't care whether you worship their gods, but Jesus had it right. Pay unto Caesar,
render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Yeah,
don't hold back, but render unto God what is God's. I mean, yeah, he got out of a little pickle with that, but that was a serious point.
Yeah, no, there is a serious point to it. And so the Roman world, the Romans themselves are accepting of, and they just assume that there are all kinds of gods, that people worship them, and the Roman state doesn't really have a stake in that. There are a couple of exceptions, though, and admittedly there are a couple of exceptions, and that's why I have that reference to restricting the cults of Bacchus, certain
Judaism and some aspects of Christianity.
And a Christianity in particular seems to cause a problem, but that, I would argue, is for the following reason. The Romans supported people in their traditional cults. So if you, and this was especially true of Judaism, the Jews had special privileges in the Roman Empire, like Julius Caesar gave them special privileges. The Emperor Claudius did. They were allowed to pay the temple tax. What they were asked to do was to when they worshiped their god, pray for the well-being of the emperor and the well-being of Rome. But they were allowed to worship. And one of the reasons why the Romans had no problem with this was because to them it was obvious that Judaism was a very ancient tradition. Christianity, on the other hand, didn't appear to them to be an ancient tradition. And I think this is especially true as we move into the late first and early second century, that you do see that there are instances where Christians appear to have been, and here I'm talking about Nero lighting up Christians in his garden party.
Right.
It's possible that the Romans viewed Christians at that time as kind of a subversive element that really became criminalized, right? And Pliny the Younger, in his letters to Trajan, you held up his letters to Trajan and his letters in general earlier, but in his letters, he talks to the Emperor Trajan when he's governor, serving as a governor in the East, saying, "What do I do with these Christians? I know that Christianity is criminal, but should I hunt these guys down? What should I do?" And the emperor says, "Well, don't chase after them, but if someone's accused, a credible accusation has to be investigated." So, it would be.
They weren't going out on the offensive to hunt them down, but if something came up and they were involved that was bad, then go ahead and pursue that.
Yeah, and in the case of Nero, the issue seems to have been him looking for a scapegoat for the Great Fire that burnt down much of Rome in 64 AD. Really, the worst persecution of Christians came in the 3rd century, when the Roman Empire is falling apart and the Romans are casting about for answers. And one of the ones they land on is, well, everybody needs to be worshiping the traditional gods to get those gods to save us and save our empire. And here we have Christians who refuse to do it. So it's then in the 200s AD that you really see the first concerted effort to crack down on Christians for not loyally participating and helping the empire out in its time of need. All right, so
very interesting.
But all that said, one of the coolest parts about this, and we have to go back to that slide. I'm sorry, I know we're kind of running into a time
it's good.
squeeze here.
It's all good. Not a worry.
We're gonna have Don in here, and he's gonna bring a lot of excitement and energy with him. But the foreign gods, the gods of different cultures that are worshipped in the Roman Empire, they're influenced by that Hellenistic culture. And again, these cultural interactions are complicated. Just because the Romans are now ruling the empire doesn't mean that all of the Hellenic influence has evaporated. It's ongoing. The Romans are Hellenized. One of my colleagues once said to me, and this is absolutely true, the largest Greek-speaking city in the Mediterranean world was Rome.
Wow.
that the Greek language was the lingua franca, just like some might argue that English has become today. In this time, it is Greek. And so all of these religions, all of these gods, they're worshipped in the empire. They take on a lot of Hellenic characteristics.
Yeah.
And Jesus fits that pattern absolutely perfectly. In other words, what's happening to Isis? What's happening to Attis? What's happening to Adonis? What's happening to all of these different gods? Mithras, who started out as a Persian god. They come into this Greco-Roman milieu, and they become increasingly Hellenized, and they start looking more like each other and looking more like the cults of the traditional gods of the Mediterranean. Well, that's Jesus too. Jesus becomes a god, and then the question is, if you're living in the Mediterranean, you're living in this world of Hellenic influence, of Roman governance, then how are you going to worship the God Jesus? And it's a complicated answer, but some of that answer has to be, well, the way other gods are worshipped, right? And so what we need to think of Christianity being is a variation of ancient Mediterranean religiosity, not that something that stands,
apart,
siloed in its own space that isn't a part of that Mediterranean world.
Okay. So Jesus wasn't in a vacuum.
Yeah, not in a vacuum. And I would say, though, it's when he dies and is deified, and when he starts being worshipped as a god, that the way that he's worshipped will increasingly take the form of how other gods in the ancient Mediterranean were worshipped. Now, this is not a statement about the truth or falsity of Christianity. It's really just a simple cultural historical viewpoint on how Jesus fits in this environment.
Right. Thank you, Steve Acosta, by the way. And I think I just saw Don.
Let's get him in here.
Start bumping in. He can help us get through the rest of these slides. We've only got like 10 left. Well, it's all good.
I was ambitious, Carrie. I'm sorry.
No, I love it. You can't.
Someone in the chat mentioned the communal meals, and that's exactly right.
That'd be Vega Dog. He's sharp. He's
Vega Dog. No, this is right. And Vega Dog, I've been watching Vega Dog, and that is exactly right. Communal meals were a very common feature of cultic groups, and they also, in mystery cults as well. And so there's a question about the relationship between Christianity and the mystery cults, right? Like Eleusis and
you and I have rattled back and forth till 2 and 3 in the morning sometimes on these subjects.
Yeah, it's true.
They're some of the funnest ways to converse. I know Don, we're going to bring you in. Is that okay?
Yeah, let's bring him in.
Don is here. I'm going to bring him in. He and I, and you and he, of course, we've all had discussions along these lines, so this will fit right in. Welcome, Don Bradley. Good to see you, brother.
Hey, Carrie, Trevor. How you guys?
Good to see you. Looks like you're chilling.
I'm just chilling, just kicking back, watching the backyard professor.
That's what we're doing. I'm learning from the real professor here.
He's a good one.
We are talking about the interesting cultural influences on the Hellenic world through the Greco-Roman cultural and accoutrements of the government and the philosophy and the religion. And we're finding that they all just mixed in. Yeah. It's like Jell-O.
Yeah. So we had a question in the chat about the Last Supper. How does the Last Supper fit into this? And I would say, it's an iconic cultic banquet, for early Christians, in their feasts, they would look back to the example of the Last Supper. And so I think it's key. Yeah. Lots of these cults, and most recently I taught a class on Mithras. People don't really think about it. Not a lot of people know it, but the cult of Mithras, which we don't know a lot about, even it had a mythological narrative, a story. And there was a very strong relationship between its rituals and its stories. Now, Mithraism wasn't alone in that. Christianity is very much the same. So I think, the Last Supper would have been in the minds of those who were feasting on special occasions, having cultic meals in celebration of Jesus, their God. Definitely.
So Trevor, it seems like so I should chime in saying that, like, I'm a historian of 19th century American religion.
Yeah.
Trevor, one of my oldest best friends in the world, so I'm honored to be here, is a historian of ancient Rome. And so this is much more in Trevor's sort of intellectual domain, but it's something that I've read about, something that we've had a lot of conversations about. So, and something actually that greatly illuminates my work in Mormon history, because what will happen over the years here is, like, Trevor and I will talk about Joseph Smith and early Mormonism, and then he will bring these ideas from, like, ancient Rome, antiquity, the larger Western esoteric tradition, and they will have themes that also run through Latter-day Saint faith.
Yeah.
And so these seemingly unlikely connections will greatly illuminate things in early Mormonism. So that's just been like an honor to be able to participate in those discussions.
Wow.
So Mithraism, as I understand, Trevor, maybe filled in some ways for people in the ancient Roman Empire a sort of similar cultural niche to what Christianity did. And I remember reading that the sites where there was Mithras worship, weren't they underground? Is this correct?
Yeah.
So that there seemed to be a strange correlation between those sites and where Christian churches were built.
Right.
The Christian churches would be like, they would take over the places where Mithraism been. And so there's some fascinating, maybe not fully understood relationship between these and how the one supplants the other.
Yeah. I would say that Mithraism was inferior religious technology compared to Christianity. And I'll tell you why. No, it was very significant. It had a big impact on late Roman religiosity, but it was really most popular among soldiers and men.
Yeah.
And
that was my understanding. Yeah.
You can't really replenish your ranks when you don't accommodate and meet the needs of half of your reproductive population, right? Half of the math is missing there. But
the men alone are presumably not going to fully pass the religion on to their children, whereas if
unless they become soldiers.
Yeah.
I mean, I think really the soldiers, that cult is strongest among men, strongest among soldiers in the Roman army, and by this, by the later period of Roman history, the army was increasingly multi-generational, but still, I think, by creating these unnatural impediments or a high price of entry. I don't know if you've looked at any of the images from Mithraic initiation, but they're terrifying. Some of them are downright terrifying, and it looked like initiation into Mithraism involved frightening the initiate and maybe even hurting the initiate. So
in some respects, the underlying theme of Mithraism, based on David Feidler in his magnificent Jesus Christ, Son of God. That's
a fun book. That's
a fun book. Yeah. He focuses a lot on Mithraism. It's the idea of the Helios, the sun, the image of the one, and the idea was, Jesus said, "I am the true light," and Mithraism. We've all kind of studied the Mithraic liturgy together in the Greek magical papyri, and they make that big whoop-de-doo about joining in with that sun. And isn't that, I just talked about this last night, the imagery in the hypocephalus, facsimile number 2 in the book of Abraham, of all things, is that sun,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's kind of fun stuff to see the ties, even though the causation may not be there. There's still plenty of room to speculate and find cultural overlaps with this.
No, definitely. Yeah.
Convergent. It's sort of like convergent evolution in biology.
No, I
right?
think so. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
And I think that all of the sun cults of the 3rd and 4th centuries AD
Oh yeah.
sought in a way to bring a kind of unity to the empire, which I think Christianity ended up satisfying, but partly by sort of taking over that role for itself.
Yeah. Thanks to
Constantine
Constantine.
worshipped Apollo and
Yeah,
Sol Invictus, or the unconquered sun,
Saw the
before he
cross,
became.
but it
Yeah,
was in the sun.
it's
The
in the, yeah,
light gave him the revelation, Trevor.
that's right. Yeah, yeah.
So something that I think, so I don't know, I don't want to derail with what you've got left to present. And I have to admit, with my Sunday, the way it's played out, I haven't caught all the previous conversations. So if I say
It's
anything,
okay.
perhaps you can
All
let
good.
me know. Several years back, I was reading a book by the great sociologist of religion who recently passed away, Rodney Stark. And Stark had done a book on, he did a lot of work on theory of religion. This book was a sort of a history of world religion. It was called The Discovery of God. And so he looked at, sort of what we can tell of like prehistoric conceptions of the divine, and then ran through, different, all around the world, different religious cultures, and sort of overlap between them and the distinctive ways that some of them developed. And when he talked about Roman religion, he talked about Roman religion at one point, and then later he talked about Christianity. And very much I could see a lot of overlap between the two, but particularly with what you guys were talking about earlier, where you had these like foreign cults that came into, with, the Roman Empire became popular, like cult of Isis, the cult of Mithras, the cult of Cybele.
Yeah.
And these cults provided something that it seems people were craving, but that more traditional homegrown Roman religion was not providing. So Roman religion, and I'm speaking on your turf here, so you know if this is right, but like Roman religion seems to me to have been more about binding together the community than about the individual having like a deep, close relationship with the god.
Yeah.
And so what these foreign cults consistently, the ones that became popular in Rome, involved was they had a heavy devotional aspect. So
Yeah.
you were loved by the god. You had a personal relationship with the god. There were communal meals that really bound you. You had tight community. There was a sense in which the community was understood to be sort of like a body, like a larger organism.
Yeah.
Right? And then when I read this, it was really mind-blowing to think, because I recognized the aspects of Christianity in this, right?
Yeah.
That in Christianity, you had this and have this great emphasis on like a close relationship with God, right?
Yeah.
With God, with Christ. And you had this sense of being really bound together with your community, and you had the ritual meals together, communion, and you had Paul is very explicit that the church is a body.
Yeah.
It's part of a larger body, and so it really
and each member needed each other member. You couldn't say, well, I'm superior to you, so go away.
Right.
Any more than the foot can say that to the knee or the hand or the ear. Yeah.
Right. So Stark, he had lots of other things like this that showed Christianity, that put Christianity in the context of Roman religion. And I started to realize Christianity is a Roman religion, right? Like it is, and I came to think this as a Christian, as Rodney Stark himself was a Christian, right? So this is not a comment on the truthfulness of Christianity, right? But it is fascinating to realize that Christianity, as it's recorded in the New Testament and as we come to know it, is really shaped by a Roman cultural context. And so, like theologically, for people who are Christian, this maybe raises some questions, kind of like how much of the New Testament is actually like influenced just by the human culture surrounding it, this Roman culture, right? And where some of that culture can just be stripped away, and you still have, what's essential to Christianity. And how much is that cultural context part of it, like in a way that cannot be removed? In which case, it seems to me that Christians, like myself, would need to posit that there's something providential in Christianity's emergence within a Roman context, that God intended certain features to emerge in Christianity. And part of how he brought that about is through this cultural context. And then, Trevor, that gets to what you were bringing up earlier, sort of about like Hellenism, anti-Hellenism, in Christianity, Protestantism, not in Catholicism. They don't have this problem, right? But in Protestantism and among Latter-day Saints, sometimes there's this idea, well, where Christianity really went wrong is we brought in the influence of the Greeks, like this classical Greco-Roman culture. That's what messed everything up.
Yeah.
Really? I mean, the New Testament is written in Greek.
Yeah.
The Judaism of the time is that Jesus is living in is heavily influenced by Greco-Roman culture. They've been, their lands have been occupied by, Hellenistic culture or Roman culture for centuries now.
Yeah.
The world that Jesus lives in is a Hellenized world. And so I think, particularly if you look at Paul's writings, if you try to strip out the Greco-Roman aspects of Christianity, you lose Christianity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good point. Yeah. And this, I think what helped make all of this doable for each of the separate little groups, like you're saying, though, is the overarching, at least for the first 4 centuries, 3, maybe 4 centuries, is Rome provided safety for those who paid your taxes. We don't care how you worship. We don't even care if 2 or 3 or 4 or 500 of you get together to go on a tour of something or other.
Yeah.
We'll give you the protection, but from the government point of view, you rebel against us and you claim to have a new kingdom. We're going to slap you down. And isn't that interesting? I read, can't remember which guy, but one of the great historical Jesus scholars, maybe Geeson or someone, said when Jesus was before Pilate, he specifically made it a point to say, my kingdom's not of this world.
Right.
And then what did Pilate do? He said, oh, well, then what are you doing here? And he went outside and washed his hands. He said, hey, this guy's fine. Don't worry about it. If Jesus would have claimed, you're in trouble, you're falling down, they'd have done a lot more than just crucify him.
Yeah.
Now, we understand the story is doctored somewhat.
Sure.
It really wasn't kind of a push. We get all that. But the theme was Rome gave great protection, just like the American government at this point in some respects, most respects, I hope. But each group was allowed to be themselves within that matrix. I was raised to compartmentalize it all, and so this has been quite an education for me the last 62 years of my life. So.
Yeah.
And it's good guys like you that taught me.
It's the thing that they provided, I think you're right, security, and one of the big ones was security at sea. It was a particular boast of the emperor that he cleared the sea of pirates, and piracy was a huge problem. And so
didn't you say he connected himself with Poseidon for that reason? Didn't you?
Neptune. In the 1st century BC, powerful Romans who fought at sea would try to connect themselves with Poseidon, like Pompey the Great, who fought the pirates, his son Sextus Pompey. And there's a beautiful gem that survives today that shows Augustus as Neptune in a chariot drawn by Tritons. So they were making a huge deal about their protection of the waters, which, by the way, ties into our topic, because who in early Christian literature wanted to show his control over the waters?
Master of the seas.
Master of the seas. And So
Yeah.
one thing that we really need to consider in this argument of Jesus as a Roman god is, how is Jesus portrayed? And this is not an argument against miracles. That's not really my point. My
Right.
point is, why do the authors pick the miracles that they choose? Why did they choose those miracles? They want to show Jesus as a master of the sea, and that's partly because the Roman emperor had the reputation of being the master of the sea.
Fascinating insight. Yeah.
I
I'm with
remember
you.
years ago reading a book about the Gospel of Mark, where
Yeah.
the Gospel of Mark had actually been structured to show Jesus's ascent, in effect, to like being essentially Caesar. Like,
Mhm.
so
You'll have to give me that title, Don.
Yeah. Don't hold back, Don. Share.
So from early on, I think the very early Christians did have a sense of Jesus as a sort of anti-Caesar, right? And so it's not surprising that, like, I don't know. I mean, that theme is there in the Gospels, right? Like what you're saying, Carrie, about what it says Pilate was saying, right? I mean, the issue is Jesus trying to challenge Caesar?
Yeah.
And I think they're trying to say, in a way, well, he's like the true Caesar. Well, they're also trying to say he's not trying to challenge Caesar, right? Like we're not political revolutionaries.
Right.
Definitely, this would be a reason maybe why there was fear of Jesus. And I'm sure you talked earlier, Trevor. I didn't hear this, but like about the Caesars themselves as sons of God.
Right. No, that's
Another
exactly
parallel
right.
theme.
Yeah.
That's a big part of the presentation. This actual theme of the Son of God was not a unique development with Jesus based within this culture, because it was part of. Now, granted, that wasn't for the everyday Joe, but
No.
it was there.
Yeah.
This
So
transformation of the human into the divine.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
And that wasn't that big in the Greek Eastern Orthodox Church.
Oh,
They're the ones that really push that divinization theme.
yeah.
Like
Oh yeah.
Trevor
The
said,
definition of
they're wrong.
salvation in Orthodoxy
Yeah.
is theosis.
Yeah, and I know Don's read a heck of a lot about theosis in Eastern
Yeah.
Christianity. So he's right now, I would consider him our local expert on theosis in the Christian tradition.
Well, hey, let's do another show together on that theme. What do you think?
I think so. That would be
That'd be a
awesome.
blast. I'd love to hear
Yeah.
your take on that, Don.
Because with in like a Latter-day Saint context, obviously you have notions of deification or exaltation, whatever
Right.
you use. But like, how does that compare to these like early Christian themes of deification, and then like a continuation of that in Eastern Orthodoxy with the doctrine of theosis?
Yeah.
How does it compare and how does it contrast?
Right.
That would be so fun to explore that with you guys. Seriously, let's do that. That would be a great topic. That would be a blast. Because in Joseph Smith's day, and again, this is just to take the church's view, that particular doctrine wasn't exactly emphasized in frontier America, and yet it was potentially available in some ways. But yeah, that's a fun topic. But this deification as a Roman theme, puts that right onto Jesus as a logical consequence.
Yeah.
Doesn't it? Am I off saying that?
I would say that, of course, in the Hebrew Bible, we hear about Israel as the son of God, or the king.
Corporate Israel, well, that's Paul's doctrine.
Or the king as the son of God.
Oh, that's true.
But Luke, I think, takes the whole thing to a new level. And he's describing in, Jesus's conception and the role of the Holy Spirit, something that's, as you read in David Litt, was much closer to contemporary ideas of how divinities conceive mortal children. And the Litwa shows how, in the case of Luke, what he says about the conception of Jesus is very similar to what Plutarch, the 2nd century Greek philosopher, Platonic philosopher, said about Apollo's conception of Plato.
Of Plato.
Yeah.
That's electrifying.
Apollo's conception of Plato
Wow.
looks very conceptually similar to the conception of Jesus.
Oh, geez.
Using very similar intellectual tools. And by the way, in both cases, both authors are seeking to show that Jesus or Plato are the children of gods, but doing so in a way that avoids the crassness and simplicity of earlier mythology. Where, you know, Zeus is wandering around looking for a hot nymph or something.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Both, you know, the educated Platonist Plutarch and Luke would find that kind of divine sireship to be offensive. And by the way, they probably wouldn't think much of Brigham Young's ideas either. But but they wanted to show in their own subtle and sophisticated and philosophically informed way, including Luke, right? He's one of those who's learned too. The Gospel of Luke.
He's the one gospel that did say, hey, I'm going to gather all these different sources. Yeah. He's the only one that did the actual research and said, and I'm going to straighten it all out. So he is using the books, the sources of his. He's the one that did that. So.
And he's a good writer. He's a good
and he's a
Greek
great
writer.
Oh, his Greek is far superior to Mark's without question.
Those Lukes are just brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Gotcha.
Oh wow! My head's gonna be so fat at the end of this. I'm not gonna be able to walk through that door back there. Guys are too nice. All right, so yeah, divine sonship, and you know,
don't you have a slide on that?
Yeah, I think we do. Let's look at these. We have two narratives. I talk about two narratives that I choose out of all of Litwa's. I mean, you've covered this stuff before with Professor McDonald, and how the Gospels use classical literature. That Jesus, Jesus in his the way he goes around challenging his society and its morality is very much like a cynic philosopher, or maybe a Jewish Socrates.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, he really is actually. I did one of my senior papers for my bachelor degree on the comparison of Jesus and Socrates, and I just found it last month, and I've been tempted to make a video of it just to show you how ridiculously silly I was early on, but then I've been looking on and I'm going, there's other people who said this also. I wasn't, I thought I was being really controversial and discovered something cool, right? Yeah, it's every kid's dream to get a
Well, anyway. But it does show you though that you're smart enough to think what these other great thinkers are thinking, you know. So
I'm smart
it's a compliment to you.
I'm smart enough not to say anything about it because I would be so wrong.
The proof that you're not Carrie, is that you're on here right now. See.
There you go.
Oh, well, now you're being very kind.
So here it is.
I'm grateful to be in your guys' presence. So yeah, here's the God-man narrative.
I'm honored by both of you, honestly, seriously.
All right, let's quit bearing our
testimony. Both of you have meant a lot to me on my journey for years. Very much.
We got a lot more fun to have together.
All right.
Yeah.
So here are our narratives. Jesus and the God-man narrative.
Oh, look at how many of them there are as the children of the gods.
Yeah.
Don, read those out loud.
Okay.
Can you see them? I'm just thinking for those who are going to listen to this instead of watch it.
Oh, okay. So we got narrative 1, heroic men as children of the gods: Dionysus, Heracles, Achilles, Aeneas, Romulus, Augustus, Jesus. Narrative 2, heroic men ascending to heaven to become gods: Heracles, Romulus, Julius Caesar, Jesus. Caveat: each version has its own unique characteristics and that uniqueness does not prove the superiority or ultimate truth of one version over the other. So Jesus, among others, fits both of these narratives.
Yeah.
Yeah, but look at how many of the ascendants that there was: Heracles and Romulus and Julius Caesar and Jesus. Now, these are the named ones, but I might add, when I gave that lecture on the Mithras liturgy with Trevor, it's been over a year ago now. I discovered in the Mithras liturgy that is exactly the purpose of that liturgy, is to get you to ascend, to become one with that God, which was the Son. So even the unnamed people were. Now that was later, though. I get it. See, all of these guys are really super duper important. I mean, they're either heroes or governors or really important emperors or gods or whatever. But eventually, even in the Mithraism, the John Q. Public and Jane Q. Public could get in on this. Same thing with the Egyptians and making Egyptian books of the dead and books of breathings for absolutely everybody. It became feasible. So it became democratized.
Yeah, and I think things like this tend to do that. And, in the LDS tradition, look what happened, for example, with the endowment, right? Where does the endowment begin? It begins with a very restricted group. And before, now we're in Don's territory, definitely. Before they head out west, there's a big push to get everybody endowed, and lots of sealings taking place, et cetera, et cetera. So second anointings, it went from something that was restricted to a very small group to something that suddenly a lot of people were receiving.
So the same thing happens in early Mormon history with regard to ideas of having sacred lineage, like descent from Israel. So the Book of Mormon gives this sort of sacred lineage mostly to the Native Americans, right? And then descent from the house of Israel. And then it also says, though, that the person who translates this book is a descendant of the biblical Joseph. So Joseph Smith is the descendant of the biblical Joseph. So it's identifying one Anglo person as sharing this sort of sacred Israelite lineage. But then by 1831, this sense is being spread to multiple people in the church, where the church members in general, the Anglo church members, are of the tribe of Ephraim. And you can actually see this. I did a paper years ago. It's not all fresh in my head, but still need to publish it. But finish
Please
it up.
do. My goodness.
It deals with the origin and development of early Mormon ideas of descent lineage. And it was fascinating for me to see how Joseph Smith, in various ways, was claiming a sort of special lineage, but then he quickly democratized that. It was universalized, right? It wasn't just him who had the special lineage. It was the Latter-day Saints in general.
Yeah, and I've often felt like this was one of the big advantages that Christianity had, that it took this, you see it, especially for me, you see it in the Gospel of John, where Jesus, in his great intercessory prayer, is talking about, how he's one with the Father, and now he wants everyone else to be one with the Father too.
Right.
And when I discovered that as a young missionary, I was like, what are these anti-Mormons at the time? I was like, what are these anti-Mormons on about? It's right here. I mean, deification is right here in the New Testament. This is what Jesus is talking about.
Yeah. Unification and deification.
Yeah.
And then I would couple that with I can't remember what part of the D&C, sorry, right off the top of my head, but maybe one of you guys will know, where Jesus actually tells Joseph Smith, he says, well, if you are not one, you are not mine.
Yeah.
And I'm going, whoa, that's an interesting kind, not a reversal, but a emphasis from a different angle. To the early Mormon interpretations. And when he said one, maybe it was a commentary I was reading, they actually emphasized the spiritual rather than the economical. But I suspect it meant the economical. And There's some people who say, well, now hold on, let's not go
no, we
that
got to
far
be
into
good. Got to be good modern economists here. Can't have this.
Yeah.
We're capitalists, darn it. None of this communist stuff. No, so yeah, I mean, Jesus. If we think that, you just look at the biography of Rome's first emperor Augustus. By the 30s BC, he was claiming not only to be the child of the divine Julius Caesar, who had ascended to heaven. In the summer of 44 BC, everybody saw a comet in heaven. This was months after the assassination of Julius Caesar, and the people.
Is that Halley's Comet? Was that
No,
the
I don't think it was Halley's Comet.
Wasn't it Halley's Comet?
No, I don't think so.
I don't know. I'll have to reread my Isaac Asimov. He talks about it.
Okay, but anyway, the people of Rome, they started speculating that Julius Caesar was headed to heaven, that he was joining the gods. And because he had, and this is Augustus now, he had been posthumously adopted by Julius Caesar, he started to brag that he was now the son of the divine Caesar. He's the son of a god. But then,
that's interesting. Through an adoption, that reminds me of Paul's language, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, no.
Through the adoption, we become the sons and daughters.
No, that's absolutely on purpose.
Trevor and I have talked for years about adoptionism in early Christianity. There was one early strain of Christian thought that saw Jesus
as the adopted,
become the Son of God later on through adoption, rather than earlier on, like pre-existently or at the time of his birth or at the time of his baptism. There were different understandings among different groups of when Jesus how is Jesus the Son of God? When does he become the Son of God?
Yeah. Wow. That is cool. That's awesome. Thank you guys for reminding me of that. Yeah. So as an adopted son of God, Jesus and other early Christians who saw them adopted through Jesus as sons of God, as children of God, they're following this idea of adoption, within the imperial dynasties. The emperors were adopting their successors. And
now you're saying this was 44 BC, Trevor?
44 BC is when the comet appears. And
that's right.
When Octavian, who becomes Augustus, starts calling himself the son of the divine Caesar.
All right.
But later in the 30s, he starts to call himself a child of Apollo, or identify himself as a child of the god Apollo.
Now, may I apologize for interrupting, but
no, you're great.
One of the interesting, fascinating parts, I never really caught this in this book, Jesus Christ, Son of God, Early Christian Cosmology Symbolism. I strongly encourage reading this book. He really emphasizes the importance of the god Apollo. Now, if I remember right, so did Nietzsche.
Yes.
Didn't Nietzsche have some information on the argument between Apollo but the harmony of Apollo with the cosmos and with the mathematics and with the gematria actually shows how the deities work together into sacred geometric diagrams.
Yeah.
And yes, it's speculative, but the harmony also exists with the musical scales.
Yeah.
And I mean, it just opened up things, but Apollo was really big stuff.
Yeah.
And so to hear that he's putting himself, I say he's in the same class of truly one of the great gods.
Yeah.
Apollo was not just one of them.
Yeah.
He was big.
Yeah. I think
he was all the cultures.
He was following in the footsteps when he did that of Alexander the Great, who was identified as the son of Zeus Ammon in Libya.
Zeus Ammon, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, sorry to interrupt you.
No. This was perfect. That's fantastic. I think what blew my mind going through the material this time, partly thanks to Lit, was I was like, wait, so Apollo's the father of Plato, Apollo's the father of Augustus.
Yeah.
Another
And Apollo is the sun god, which Jesus followed in that tradition.
Yeah.
And the gematria, I know, but Joe Swick taught me this, and it was impressive.
Yeah.
The gematria of some of these Greek gods with Jesus works out really interesting. Perhaps we can do a show on that.
We should do a show on Joe.
The great Joe Swick.
Yeah, Joe Swick.
Yeah, Joe Swick. Just I love that.
Yeah, no, he's
beyond
a giant, you know.
So anyway, okay, enough distraction. What's this slide?
This slide
this is more of the issue, isn't it?
This is Luke. This is Luke talking about how Jesus was conceived. So Jesus is the Son of God, and we know that Luke wrote about this in a way that's very similar to how Plutarch described the conception.
You can write a commentary on it, and we can call it Luke on Luke.
That sounds like an OnlyFans channel thing. Sorry, that was bad.
That was good. You're competing with RFM now. That's impressive.
Well, that's why I like the guy, you know.
Absolutely.
I'm sort of like a minor version of RFM, the great RFM. So, ascension to godhood. All right. Well,
now,
Julius...
this makes sense because this follows right after realizing, well, we are adopted into the God family. So, where is God?
He's in the heavens. Yeah.
He's in the heavens.
That's right.
Here we go. Yeah.
Well, the Milky Way is the path of souls, right?
Yeah, right on. Yes.
So there,
and not only in the Greco-Roman Western world, but it has also been discovered by Walter Sullivan in his book "The Secret of the Incas." I talked with John Lundwall on this, and in the Mayan. Remember when Linda Sheely wrote her fabulous book with Friedel and those guys on the Maya cosmos?
Oh, sure, I know all about that stuff, Gary.
The Milky Way was the tree of life. That's in Izapa Stela number 5.
Wow,
that's a depiction of the Milky Way in a mythological factor as the tree. Yes, and the umbilical cord. So this is big stuff worldwide.
Yeah,
interesting. Sorry to interrupt.
No. I mean, listen, Carrie, your knowledge astounds me. The stuff that you know. So much respect for you and all of the knowledge you bring to the table. You know, I think for us, all three of us, and I think a lot of us who are in the chat right now and watching, and we're all fascinated by the myths and how they resonate with each other, and really the human experience going back to deep antiquity. And that's what really drives my interest in this. My interest in this is not about, you know, puffing myself up or taking down people for being religious or making fun of Christianity or anything. It's really just the joy of trying to understand this world better, this world that comes before us but shapes who we are today. So
amen, brother. Hallelujah. Praise the Lord, and pass the mustard.
Woohoo!
So Romulus, what's this? Why did you bring Romulus into this? That's an early. I mean, isn't that one of the founders of Rome way back 700 BC? What's this got to do with ascension to godhood? Explain that.
Okay, so first of all, Romulus is the child of Mars. The child of Mars. So he also fits in that he's one of two twins. There's Romulus and Remus.
Yeah. I'm going to grab my Plutarch.
Yeah, Plutarch has a great biography of Romulus.
He does.
You can also find him in the first book of Livy's History of Rome, Ab Urbe Condita. So he fits the bill there. So he founds Rome. He becomes its first king. And at the end of his life, he's taken up into heaven and becomes a god.
Now, hold on. I've got to double check. I knew you were going to go that direction. I just want to make sure that you're reading your Plutarch correctly, because the backyard professor is known for sometimes you have to test things and make sure that everybody is doing this right.
Well, is there more than one version, Carrie?
Probably.
Yeah.
There's the BBT, the backyard professor translation of Plutarch.
Nobody will pay attention to that one. You keep talking. I'm going to find this.
No, but there's more than one version about the end of Romulus's life.
Oh, yeah, but his death is a mystery. His body is missing.
Yeah, his body's missing. Yeah.
That's why I suppose, here it is, page 43, Romulus, Plutarch's Lives. His sudden and strange disappearance a short while after the Senate fell under suspicion and calumny. He disappeared on the nuns. Is that the nuns or the nones of July, as they are now called, the nuns, which then Quintillus, leaving nothing of certainty to be related of his death, only the time. And whereas Romulus, when he vanished, left neither the least part of his body, nor any remnant of his clothes to be seen, the face of the sun was darkened, and the day turned into night.
Yeah.
And that too, no quiet, peaceable quarters during which the common people dispersed and fled. So this was big stuff. I mean, even with Romulus, that's quite interesting. So good professor, I have verified what you're saying. I just want you to know.
You got to keep me honest, man.
Double check stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
Very good.
So we've got the parallel here of Romulus with Elijah and with Alma the Younger in the Book of Mormon, right? They all just disappear.
That's right.
Nice touch, Don. Yeah. See, that's why we wanted you here, Don.
Yeah.
Now this thing branches out. I love it. I love it.
Right. And so to reiterate, because your point is well taken, Don. It's not like these things are only happening in one culture in this area of the world. These themes are happening in other places too. The question that I'm bringing up here is, so if you're a Gentile who's looking at this Jesus movement, what about his story is going to be compelling to you? And why might you be attracted to it? And I think there are certain things that these people, themes that people emphasized that they looked for in the gods that they worshiped. And, the story of Romulus, the story of Julius Caesar's ascent into heaven, they hear about Jesus and
sorry, I wanted to see if you had Caesar, so sorry.
No, I don't have Caesar. But please go ahead. That's exactly where we're going next. That's
okay.
Jesus' ascension.
So we have Romulus, we also have Caesar, and now we have this ascension to godhood, Jesus as well. So this is an honorable ancient tradition here that we're tapping into.
Yeah,
that goes way back.
And guess who we have here again? Which gospel I'm quoting?
Your own.
Luke.
Exactly. Yeah. I wrote it thousands of years ago, so I could hoodwink you guys today.
We're hoodwinked.
But no, it's fascinating that it's Luke. There's a lot more to be that we need to dig into here with Luke. Because I don't think it's a mistake that he has both of these narratives, the conception of Jesus, the ascension of Jesus.
Oh, good point.
He's the most, really the best at his Greek. He knows what he's talking about. He knows his world. He's writing maybe at the end of the 1st or the early 2nd century AD in an environment where, the divinity of the emperor is a huge deal. It's a big topic of discussion, and it's a big topic of intercultural tension between people's more Hellenic and more Jewish. We're getting toward the time when there will be a huge rebellion, the Bar Kokhba rebellion in Egypt and the Near East, which involves a nationalistic messianic figure, the kind of person that maybe some people...
the star, he was fulfilling the prophecy in Numbers, they were saying.
That's right. Yeah. See?
If I remember correctly. Yeah.
No, you're exactly right. Carrie, you know that stuff better than I do. Come on. You're being so if I remember correctly, it's
just a lucky guess.
This is no. You're the guy on this stuff. But again, I think it's looking at that passage in Luke, he's the one that really shows you here's Jesus going up into the heavens.
Yeah.
And it came to pass while he blessed them, he was parted from them and carried up into heaven.
Uh-huh.
That's not something you see in Mark. That's not something you see in John.
No, not at all.
This is.
Oh, yeah, you don't actually see it in John either, and yet it's interesting that everybody kind of. I'm generalizing, but the evolution through the Gospels. I've got the Mark course from Dr. James Tabor, and his is the earliest, the most quote primitive, the simplest, I should say, but. We say John is probably the most how would you describe this? Help me out, Don. Spiritual, the most advanced or something like that. And yet here we have Luke giving quite the discussion here on an ascent into godhood of Jesus. That's pretty big stuff.
Well, and I think if you're like from an LDS background, if you're an active LDS, you look at what happens after he goes to heaven. They worship him, they go back to Jerusalem, and then they're continually in the temple. Right. I tell you, back in the day, I would have been really cogitating on that one for a long time. Because the temple is a place of heavenly ascent. So you bring those two things close to each other.
Like Nibley says, it's the hierocentric point. It's the pinpoint between heaven and the earth. And John Lundwall said it's called the temenos, the sacred place.
Yeah.
That's where you get your bearings on the universe. So, yeah.
That was the Lundwall episode. That was a great episode. That was really cool.
That was a lot of fun to do. We're going to do some more, just like us three.
Cool.
Okay, so let's see what else we have.
All right. The maturation of Christianity as a Roman religion.
The sword here, Kish. So
what's that?
Now you're drawing the sword. This sounds confrontational. The maturation of Christianity as a Roman religion. Yeah. So we're not. See, I mean, honestly, weren't we raised with the idea that within the church that Christianity was actually its own coherent, originating, growing thing until the apostasy, so it was separated from Rome. I've never seen this theme put forward as a Roman religion, because it's the Romans who were the apostates. So take that, Trevor.
I mean, there is that idea that Jesus founds a church, and when Jesus is there and when the apostles are there, it's in its pure best form, but the apostles pass on, and then it starts, progressively to get more corrupted, and the Greek influence comes in, and then, you basically lose the thread, as it were, waiting for the restoration to happen. But I'm glad to say that we know that there are scholars who are revisiting all of these questions.
Yes, the former group called Farms, now the Neil A. Maxwell Institute. Don, didn't they just publish a book like a year or two ago, kind of re-examining this theme?
Reassessing the theme of the Great Apostasy.
Yeah.
And
I'd like to read that. I haven't read it yet. So,
I mean, they didn't know that the Great Apostasy actually happened much later. That's all I'm going to say. It's that anti-Hellenism. That's the Great Apostasy. And now we're only emerging out of it. And I'm going to be the savior of that movement.
I believe.
The Gospel of Luke. The Gospel of Luke. I'm just kidding.
The Gospel of Trevor, Terry, and Dawn.
Just put the Trevor in brackets. The Gospel of Luke.
There you go.
Yeah, but what I'm talking about here is how Christianity increasingly comes to be articulated in terms that are recognizable to learned people of that era. And
Right.
so
Yeah.
really the big, here we're talking like anti-Nicene fathers. These guys didn't fall off of a turnip truck. They weren't, fishermen in Galilee. They're educated Platonists and so forth. And so that only advances the development of Christianity as a religion of the Roman Empire, and a religion that will, one day be completely accepted by that empire and become the empire's state religion.
Right.
So,
of course, one of the big problems with the anti-Hellenistic interpretation of the Great Apostasy, or rather the interpretation that the apostasy was Hellenization, is, as we were alluding to earlier, how baked in Greekness, Hellenism is in the New Testament, that first of all, obviously, it's the language of the text.
Yeah.
But also, you look in the prologue to the Gospel of John, and Jesus is identified with the Logos.
Yeah.
This is
that's huge.
Term, right? That loaded term within Hellenistic thought and Hellenized Judaism at the time. And so if you wanted, suppose that this idea hypothetically were true, that really originally Christianity is just very Judaic, totally separate from like Hellenism, Greek culture, Greek ideas, and that you want to keep them separate to keep this apostasy of Hellenization from happening, what should you not do in that case? Well, you should not write your scriptures in Greek. You should not use Greek philosophical terms as your way of understanding Jesus.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's explicitly what you would not do. That's not what's going on here, right?
Yeah,
this
not
is
at all.
Very much Christianity is the intellectual matrix of the time. Who were the people of that time in the Western world who had the advanced concepts to explore theology?
Yeah,
The
right.
Greeks provide those concepts. In fact, it's the Greeks, isn't it the Greeks who still provide those concepts for us today?
Right.
I mean, our intellectual apparatus in the West comes from the Greeks. And
it is. Yeah.
The idea, I mean, of course, they were going to use the intellectual tools available to them of reasoning and thought and so on, categories that they had to understand their experience with Jesus, their experience with God. That meant using philosophy.
Indeed.
This was a Greek thing. This was what the Greeks had invented and gifted to the people around them.
And there's no theology without the Greeks.
Right.
It just doesn't happen.
Besides, Philosophie is the love of wisdom.
Yeah.
So that makes sense that they would turn to
that.
And it's not necessarily now I've read barely enough that I get the impression that it's not necessarily philosophy versus revelation.
No.
Those two are not dichotomous terms after all.
No, they aren't.
And that's my way. I have become much more right. Exactly.
He was listening to his daimon. He was listening to a divinity to guide him.
Right.
Trevor and I have talked a fair amount about the contemporary Eastern Orthodox theologian David Bentley Hart. He's an Eastern Orthodox theologian at Notre Dame, and just like really gives a powerful, powerful exposition of traditional Orthodox ideas, but also just of classical theism in general. And so he really shows maybe some of the best of this tradition of understanding Christianity in light of the Greek cultural matrix in which it emerged. And I personally, I think that very, I guess 180 degrees opposite to the people who say Hellenization Greekness, Greek ideas, and so on, or the great apostasy, I think the opposite. I see it as there's divine providence in Christianity's emergence within the Hellenized world.
Yeah.
So that the Christian encounter with God could be deeply understood in terms of the best, concepts, best conceptual thinking available.
Yeah. That's really cool. I agree. So it's getting late. We've had people for nearly 2 hours.
No, they love it. They'll go for 3. Let's keep going.
Okay.
You think I'm kidding? My audience loves this
Okay.
stuff.
I will have some time limits here myself.
Okay. So we could look at the miracles.
Sure.
Right. Oh, yeah. We've talked about this before, haven't we, Trevor?
I think so. Yeah.
This is kind of fun.
So this is a theme that really runs from the Gospels, all the way forward.
Yeah. Now, I was going to say, I apologize. I don't mean to interrupt, but this last point, the Christian miracles, now this is the maturation of Christianity. They competed with pagan miracles for good press, healings, even aid to the imperial army. So with that, let's look at this one.
Okay, wonderful.
We just didn't specifically mention that last one, but this is the segue into this.
Yeah, it is the segue.
And you have such a great point to make here. So okay,
so here we have Marcus Aurelius, and you guys probably know Marcus Aurelius because of his
heard of him.
Stoic philosophy, his meditations. Even people today read Marcus Aurelius, including Carrie.
And he's still a bestseller.
Yeah,
truly.
Still a bestseller. He was.
I had a heck of a time convincing the bookstore to try to get a copy in before it ran out online. So, yeah.
Wow. Okay. All right. So, unfortunately for Marcus Aurelius, who was really a thinking man, as much or more than being a man of action, he had to fight for much of his reign on the sort of southeastern European frontier of the Roman Empire, around the Danube River and so forth.
Yeah.
And his army was in a horrible spot. They were surrounded by the Quadi, a tribe called the Quadi, and the Quadi were keeping them boxed in so they couldn't get anything to drink. And according to 3rd century historians, so writing, I would say, about 40 to 50 years after this event, Dio Cassius describes how the gods sent rain to save the Roman army. And in fact, he says that there was an Egyptian magician named Arnufus, a companion of Marcus Aurelius, who had invoked by means of enchantments various deities, and in particular Mercury, the god of the air. And by this means, rain came down and saved the Roman army. Now, you're saying, okay, this is crazy. Late 3rd century historian, or excuse me, early 3rd century historian. Show me your evidence. Well, evidently, we have 2nd century evidence closer to the time that the event happened on that column back there. If we go back a slide.
Sorry.
And you see the rain.
The picture. Okay.
The picture of the rain. This is from the Marcus Aurelius's column in Rome that shows this miracle of the rain that saved the Roman army. So that's, I would say that's probably better evidence than we have. And I hate to say this in a way that sounds kind of provocative and challenging.
Just say it.
Better evidence than we have for any of Jesus's miracles. Because it's so close in time to when the event happened, and it's sitting there etched in stone. Now, but you notice there's not a lot of detail.
We all know this has to be false doctrine, though, because it wasn't Mercury, it was Hermes.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, Arnufus, the Egyptian magician, is going to be invoking Thoth, or Thoth, right?
Well, yeah.
He's not going to be.
I was being sarcastic. Mercury and Hermes are the same ones anyway. So, Thoth, they're all intermingled. In fact, isn't it interesting that in some of the early Enoch literature, Enoch is identified?
Oh,
with
yeah.
Yeah, boy,
Definitely.
here we go down
Here
a
we
rabbit
go.
trail.
Down the Hermetic rabbit hole.
Well,
so that's interesting. So there's actually a sculpture, a carving.
Yeah, a carved column.
So there you go. The Roman religion is true. Why have we not joined them?
Well, at least Jesus
now
is
this
the
is
Roman
interesting
God.
because, that's true. James Tabor, actually, when he was talking to us about the Gospel of Mark in his online presentation, it was fantastic. There were like 300 of us there. And then I had him on my show afterward. He mentioned that Mark specifically does not invoke the miracles as a basis for believing in Jesus. And then he described that. One of these times I'll have to have him back on and he can explain that. But so this is interesting, this rain miracle. And it was later Christians who began to take the miracles as a divine sign, but you have to stop and ask, okay, well, Matthew, Mark, and Luke don't necessarily do that, but John is specifically identified as the gospel of signs.
Wow.
There's 7 signs that Jesus showed, so that John in the end, what is it, chapter 22 or 25 or something, where he says, by these signs, this is the evidence you may know we are telling you the truth about this character called Jesus Christ. Kind of interesting, the contrast comparison.
Yeah. All right. So, but, Dio Cassius, the column of Marcus Aurelius, they don't have the last word. We flip to the next slide and we see that Christians claimed that they were the ones. So Tertullian, writing in the late 2nd century, so after Marcus Aurelius, but actually before Cassius Dio, he writes that Marcus Aurelius bore testimony in his letters, in his correspondence, that the Germanic drought was removed by rains obtained through the prayers of the Christians who chanced to be fighting under him. Right?
Yes.
So,
the right God, I'm just saying.
But what I find interesting about this is we have this miraculous event and we have different religious factions all claiming that their deities were the ones responsible for these miracles. And there are the Christians in the Roman army at that time.
Very good point. Yeah.
And they were there. I mean, I think we can be certain that there would have been a pretty sizable number of Christians in the Roman army who are saying, no, we prayed for rain. And it could be that Marcus Aurelius mentioned it. We don't know. Or it could be that Tertullian is making it up to provide himself a good argument. But really, the interesting part to me is that here we see Christianity operating alongside other cults and methods for
miracles and
harnessing the miraculous power of the gods.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
We should thank Res Ipsa.
Thank you, Res Ipsa. Appreciate that. That's very kind of you. He's got to go early, darn it. Of course, we're talking a little longer. It's okay. He can rewatch the video, and we are good friends with Res on the message board. We can
DiscussMormonism.com.
Yeah.
He's one of the best posters there. Fantastic.
He really is. He's a fabulous moderator, too.
Yeah.
So.
All right.
Okay, let's get to Constantine. This is where we've been working toward all night long, people. We have arrived.
This is where it all happens.
This is where it all began.
This
and you
is the
thought
big
it was
change.
with Jesus. Oh, wait, it was.
All right. So, Constantine, Well, Constantine was just like any other Roman emperor in many ways. And he's famous for reuniting the Roman Empire after it had been for a while ruled by a tetrarchy, a system of 4 emperors that was established by the Emperor Diocletian in the late 3rd century. So here we are in the early 4th century, and through civil war, Constantine, one of those 4 emperors, reunites the entire empire, and the god that he credits with his victory is Jesus.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Now, why would he do that?
Well, because of a miracle. So he
Which
claims.
was?
He sees the Cairo symbol that stands for Christos in the heavens, and he hears a voice saying, "In hoc signo vinces." Under this sign, you will conquer.
The Cairo is. Explain what the Cairo is for those who aren't. What's the Cairo? What do you mean when you say he saw the Cairo?
Well, do you know that my Siri just started to answer your question?
Why didn't you turn her up? Turn her up. We're getting everybody involved tonight. Yeah, baby.
An extra guest, right? The first 2 letters of Christos, anointed, the title of Christ.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
The Cairo.
The Cairo.
Christos.
Keep talking. Okay, so and then what was the words?
In hoc signo vinces, under this sign you will conquer. That's the Latin version.
Okay. And so he did, actually.
And so he did.
And that's why he converted, right? Well, he didn't convert, but he turned the state, the religion.
I think I'm not one of those people who's skeptical of his conversion. Okay. But we have to ask ourselves what that meant. And I think this is where it gets interesting and complicated. Because to that point, his primary deities as a ruler, the ones that he had associated himself with, were Apollo and the unconquered sun.
Oh, there you go.
Apollo and the unconquered sun.
That's why I use them that late.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Definitely. Still there.
How interesting.
Now, everybody makes a huge deal out of Constantine, and it's for a good reason. I mean, this is historically a watershed moment. There's no doubt about it. But as a Roman historian, this is what I see. Roman commanders chose patron gods to get their help in battles. This had been happening for centuries. Okay. When Augustus went to fight his enemies, he took as his patron god Apollo. All right.
Interesting. Yeah.
So what is Constantine doing here? Constantine is doing the very same thing that Roman commanders had done for centuries. The only difference is the god that he chose. On this occasion, instead of choosing Jesus...
And it wasn't different after all.
Instead of choosing the unconquered sun, literally as the unconquered sun, he chose Jesus. And the big difference was the ramifications of having chosen that particular deity. He does what every Roman general does, but the god that he chose was exclusionary. It was a god that didn't tolerate the other gods. And so having made that choice, Constantine has to live with the ramifications of doing it. So what he does, and this is another part of the Roman general's playbook, when the god comes through, then you have to show your gratitude to the god for having done this. And usually it means building temples to the god, celebrating feasts, victory celebrations, all to say, hey, this God came through and helped me out, and now I'm going to pay him back. And that's exactly what Constantine does. He diverts economic resources, builds churches, gives privileges to Christian priests, and now we see the ball gets rolling. Here.
Oh, he even gives them their special day, Sunday.
Yeah, he gives them, and so this process continues. And also, it represents an emperor for the first time starting to kind of turn away from the other gods. After about 8 years, he quits putting the images of other gods on his coins. He's the money that he's diverting to the building of churches, he's taking away from the traditional cults, which were all subsidized by the emperor, these pagan cults. And that's that, but that is extremely consequential, because what he's done is he's, as this big influencer, he's sort of like a celebrity. Once a celebrity does something, you're going to get a lot of people who are emulating what that celebrity does.
Yeah.
And
I just noticed something. Okay, so he adopts Jesus as his deity before the battle at the Milan Bridge. That's that's in 312, and it's just a few years later, 325, when the Council of Nicaea is called to settle the issue of the theology of God. I did not realize that was that close.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. How interesting. That's just 12, 13 years later.
And by the 380s, you have a Latin Bible.
And by
Yeah. And by the 390s, laws are then passed against worshiping pagan gods. And so the tables, by the 390s, the tables have turned.
Have switched.
Yep. Now, the persecutors have become the persecuted, so to speak, in that now the Roman state isn't coming after Christians for being Christians. The Roman state is coming after pagans for worshiping the traditional gods in the 390s. And so,
boy, there's a switch up, right?
Yeah. So by the 5th century, essentially what you have is Christianity triumphant. The God Jesus has vanquished all of his competitors, and the Roman state, for the first time, has a single state cult, and that's the cult of Christianity.
Now, when you say cult, you're not being disparaging.
No. I mean a form of worship, but it's an official state religion.
Yeah. I just wanted to make that sure.
No, thank you.
Some people in our day have misunderstood cult.
Yeah,
and even we've misused it. So, I'm guilty of that myself. So stupid cultists can't figure it out.
It's a fascinating story, right? Because like I was mentioning earlier, in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus is really portrayed, like framed as like ascending to being Caesar, right? And, within a few hundred years, that's essentially what happens.
Oh, yeah.
He's Lord, he's Dominus, right? He's Lord over the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
And and also it fascinates me that like this really fits the whole theme of Christianity from teachings of Jesus through Paul and on, where, Jesus gives this teaching that he who abases himself, he who humbles himself shall be exalted, while he who exalts himself shall be humbled, right? So the person who lowers himself or herself is then raised up by God, right?
Yeah.
So Jesus, here you have Jesus as the Lord, Master, Teacher, right? He washes the feet of the disciples, which would have been the task of a slave.
Yeah.
So Jesus is taking on the role of slave, essentially. He's lowering himself. Then the idea is God, therefore Paul says, God hath highly exalted him. God lifts him up, makes him Lord over everything, right? Well, Jesus, he and Paul dwells on this theme. He says Jesus, in Philippians 2, had been pre-existently had been in the form of God, but didn't think that equality with God was something to be grasped at, but instead he lowers himself, he empties himself, kenosis, and then he even, submits even to death, even death on a cross, the most ignominious type
most humiliating
of death, right?
and
And
shameful.
because of that, God highly exalts him.
Mm-hmm.
And like in sort of theological terms, right? You have the highest being, right? You have God, then coming down to like the backwater of the Roman Empire.
Yeah,
Right?
it really is.
Galilee, right? And so, and he comes as within the peasant class as a builder, a tecton.
Yeah, tecton. Yeah.
This is a low status thing. And so my friend, I think you probably know him online too, Pedro Olivaria.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I know him.
In Christianity, God comes into the world in the form of like an illegal immigrant Mexican Home Depot worker or something.
Yeah.
But then he is raised up precisely because of this, right? And so this lowest sort of person within the empire comes to, within centuries, rule the empire. He becomes this sort of Caesar on sort of the highest possible level.
Yeah.
So it's really, I mean, on any level, spiritual, literary, symbolic, whatever, it is just a sort of a mind-boggling story of the triumph of a Galilean peasant over the entire Roman Empire.
Yeah.
The reversion of the values.
Right. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
That's huge in the Greek literatures, according to Dennis MacDonald, too. That's why the gospel authors pulled in those epics, because they were reversing them to help elevate Jesus, who was the lowliest. I mean, he was born in a barn. Come on, it doesn't get worse than that. You know what I mean?
That's what my mom said of me. Does that mean I've got a great future?
I mean, he's essentially born in a barn and laid in a trough, right?
Yeah.
Trough. Do you know what a trough is, you guys? Yeah, that's where the animals slobber to drink the water and all that crap. Have you ever seen a cow trough?
I'm an old farm boy.
They're horrible. Yeah, right. So anyway, very good. Very good.
Yeah, so I think we basically covered it. I mean, we don't.
Oh, there's Apollo, yeah.
Yeah. No,
lightning strikes the property of Octavian in Palatine Hill, interpreted as Apollo commanding him to build a temple. Now, see, that makes sense. Story begins to circulate in the early 30s BC that Octavian is the son of Apollo, always the son of Apollo. I think that's interesting. And then he credits his patron god, Apollo, with leading him to victory over Antony and Cleopatra in the Battle of Actium. Did I pronounce that right, Trevor? Actium?
Yeah.
Okay. And then Constantine follows the pattern of earlier Roman commanders, including Octavian, and he chooses a patron deity for a war. And the difference is Jesus demands exclusive devotion, or at least his followers demanded it of him. So,
yeah, well, I think this is part of the Jewish roots of Christianity, that you worship God and God only.
Yeah, the Shema. Yeah.
Yeah. So at no point do I think that Christianity ceases to be, in a sense, Jewish. As I've said it, and I've read others since, I thought of it this way, so I'm taking credit like a humble person would.
Do it. We will humbly give you the credit too. So
no, but
shut up and brag.
Yeah, you're humbling yourself so you'll be exalted.
There you go. And I will be happy to exalt you.
All the way out of this program, right?
Just as soon as we're done bragging on you.
No, actually, but there's a great, if you're interested in this topic, before we met this evening, and it was like in the last hour, I found this interesting blog called A Perennial digression. I'll put the title of it.
Oh, I've seen that.
And now I don't expect a lot of people to agree with this author on political issues, but as far as the topic for tonight's discussion goes, this is a fantastic blog entry. Ooh, I can't do it. I can't post a link in here, Carrie.
No, I don't think it'll let you. I'll put it in. I'll find it and put it in the description.
Who is the author?
David
All
Armstrong.
you have to do is Google it, a perennial digression. Put the author's name too.
And the entry is "There is no Paul without Plato." And
interesting.
The author's name is David Armstrong, but
Armstrong. All right.
This is filled with quotable material that describes the relationship between Judaism, Hellenism, and the Roman Empire. And essentially he says that Christianity is a Judaism for Gentiles living in a Roman governed world. Christianity is a Judaism for Gentiles living in a Roman ruled world.
And that's how Paul looked at it.
And that's exactly what it is.
Oh yeah, there can be no Paul without Plato. You just said
there can be no Paul without Plato.
I'm slow on the uptake, but at least I got it right.
And I like this. Now, of course, I think he has kind of a political or religio-political axe to grind, but
this is our friend RFM. Rather than Plato, he likes Play-Doh.
Would there be Paul without Play-Doh? I don't
know. He goes, and this is why, third, I think Christianity is also indisputably Roman. Latin is the third of the languages of the Titulus Crucis, the title of the cross, the first message of the gospel inscribed by hand, the inscription on the cross.
Right.
And I think with good reason. It is to the imperial might, the administrative powerhouse of the Romans, that the message of Jesus is ultimately aimed. Not just as Paul was commanded to testify before Caesar, or just as Paul was commanded to testify before Caesar. Christianity is the kind of synthesis of Judaism and Hellenism as an interval between the two only possible in the Roman world in particular. It is one thing for Jews to Hellenize. That was going on long before Rome. It's another thing for Greeks to Judaize. That too was happening before Rome. It is only within the Altaimonia Romae, the walls of lofty Rome, that a new form of Judaism for Gentiles that is simultaneously fully Greek could emerge, a new entity that effectively invented religion as a concept the way we know it today. I think that's good enough. That gets the idea across. So
that was because of the matrix, the mixing in of it wasn't in spite of any one of them. They didn't remain compartmentalized. In fact, they never were compartmentalized. Maybe that's our modern conception. It's always been soup. It's soup. It's soup.
So within like 5 minutes, here I ought to go.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. That builds on sort of what I was saying earlier that I've been thinking based on reading Rodney Stark. Right? It appears to me, and I do not have enough expertise really to say this, but it appears to me that sort of the character of early Christianity, the way it's brought together in the text, the way it's understood symbolically, marks it as a distinctively Roman religion, right? That this is its cultural context of emergence. This is the context in which it could come together. And that, again, like I was mentioning earlier, sort of one can look at this multiple ways in terms of religious belief, right? That just marks Christianity as it's just a reflection of a certain cultural context, therefore it's invalid, right? Or, but I don't think that's the only way of viewing it, right? Yeah. If one believes as the early Christians certainly did, in like a deity who shapes the events of the world, then sure, this is the context that deity used to bring about this religion. I think similar to how Latter-day Saints think that, the early U.S. context had been actually brought about by God in order for the Latter-day Saint restoration to occur.
Yeah.
Right? So in that sense, there's no contradiction in saying this is very much shaped by this cultural context and only possible within this cultural context, and it's divine.
Yeah.
Interesting. Leave it to Don to be able to pull in something so well.
Isn't that amazing?
That's why we have you on here, young
I know.
man.
We got to look good here,
By the way, I'm jealous because one of my patrons in the chat said, "You, of all the LDS men, you have the best head of hair." And I have to agree. So you've got that, pal. You've got the best head of hair and you've got the best brain inside that skull. So it's an honor having you.
Okay.
Well, this has been incredible. I've thoroughly enjoyed this.
No, thank you.
You mind if I give the closing prayer? I mean, the closing thought. And then we'll talk behind the scenes for a quick minute. But thank you to all of our chat.
Yeah,
who've held out with us. I took us to 2.5 hours. I apologize, I think.
Okay.
But when you get two geniuses like this together, you guys have to take advantage of what they know, because we don't get this kind of information just every day. So this has been quite a delight and an honor, and I thank both of you for coming on my show. I appreciate it more than I can express. Thank you for all of your support in the chat, and I love all of you. I really do, but it is Sunday night, and for the love of Sam Walton, we have got to call it good. I can take his name in vain. I used to work for him. So yes, sir.
It's okay, because when Trevor and I get together to talk, we tend to go way longer than this.
Oh man, it's so
well.
true.
You and I have too.
For hours and
well,
hours.
you and I have too, Trevor. So what
true.
We're going to do is we're going to put all three of us together and do one of those John DeLynn Mormon stories, 6.5 hour long. That'd be a hoot and a holler. We'll have to take turns with the potty break, but it's all good. So thanks, you guys. We're going to head out. We appreciate all of your fun and interest, and thank you too for sharing all of your good knowledge. We will do this again. We've got to go. Have a great evening for the rest of the evening, and remember, be well, do good, have fun, make lots of friends, because I'm not kidding, having friends is much better, more enjoyable than making enemies. So we are out of here, people. Till next time.